What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel, and if you guys are new, welcome. Today we are bringing it to Arc 3.0 Titan using an exotic arms that aren't used too much inside of Destiny as far as I can tell, but I have actually loved using this build for that end game content, being the ad clear support character that a Titan can be. Now, as always, we're starting off in our subclass ability aspects and fragments that are going to pair with our ACD feedback gauntlets, creating that effect of arc damage around us when we get hit by melees. So we're going to be using our Thunder Crash Super to help with our damage, wiping out some of those champions and higher up bosses in that master endgame activity. For me, I'm using Towering Barricade. You can use Rally if you want it back a little bit faster, but I like the safe and play with Towering Barricade as well as Strafe Lift. Now for me, I'm using Seismic Charge with this build to blind enemies. When we are amplified, that blinding radius has a bigger effect, and being up close and personal with ACD feedbacks is super clutch with this build. Now we're using Storm Grenades on our Titan because of our aspects over here. Touch of Thunder, our Storm Grenades after detonating create a roaming cloud that tracks to nearby targets. Very good for sustained DPS, ad clear, so taking it into endgame activities, very key with Storm Grenades and Touch of Thunder. Second, we're using Knockout, so critically wounding a target or breaking their shield infuses your melee attack, which gives us increased range and damage for a short period of time. When we are defeating these targets, we also get health regen, and it makes us amplified, which comes into play with having that blinding radius be even larger. Now for our fragments that we're going to be using, Spark of Resistance, which is super important for this build. While surrounded by combatants, you take less incoming damage because we're going to be up close and personal, helping out our fellow guardians with these arms, creating that nice explosion of arc damage when we take our melee hits on us. Now we're also using Spark of Recharge. When we do get critically wounded, our melee and grenade come back faster, and since we're going to be in the thick of it with this build, especially in some of that endgame content, we will happen to be critically wounded a few times, which just allows us to get back our melee, which will proc knockout, giving us that health regen, so it's a nice little feedback that we have there. On top of that, we have Spark of Magnitude, so our Storm Grenades have extended duration, helping us with that sustained DPS as well as that sustained ad clear and support that we're making this character for. And last but not least, Spark of Feedback. Taking melee damage briefly increases your outgoing melee damage output, so this right here is going to help us create that survivability, and with that blinding effect do more damage on our actual melee. So it is a very clutch fragment that we have inside of this build. Moving on to our weapons, we are again bringing in our Deliverance. I think it is one of the best kinetic fusions. Riptide being stasis as well with Demolitionist Chill Clip, also a good combo, but getting those defeats helps us get our grenade back with Demolitionist, and then slowing those champions and higher up enemies down with Chill Clip is super essential for having to reset or get out if you are super low health in master endgame content. Now for me, I'm bringing in the Brigand's Law sidearm with this build. I don't know if I'm actually going to craft the enhanced version of this with Feeding Frenzy and Volt Shot. Those are the two perks that I'm going for with this weapon, but it is very costly in the materials for basically the same output, and Volt Shot with this build very good for that extra ad clear and DPS, causing that jolting on targets. We're also throwing on Thunderlord here for that overload capability, as well as just that ad clear potential with the chaining of lightning, Feeding Frenzy on this, as well as the catalyst, basically giving us subsistence on this weapon as well. Moving on to our armor mods that we have here. So we're going to have machine gun ammo finder for our nice Thunderlord, as well as melee wall maker. So when we are up close and personal, when we get those charged melee defeats, which give us that health regen, as well as that blinding effect, we will be able to create arc elemental wells, which will in turn give us back our abilities and come into play with other mods that we have. Now right here on our exotic gauntlets, the ACD feedback fences, which is going to give us that Fury Conductor's exotic armor perk. So melee hits build energy, being struck by a melee attack reduces incoming damage and unleashes energy in a devastated explosion. So with having that shoulder charge and getting those melee hits, we build up that Fury Conductors, and when we're up close and personal, we get hit by one enemy and it sends off that nice discharge, almost like Black Panther, with storing that kinetic energy, creating a burst of it. This is how this build comes into play, being up close and personal, just wiping out everything with getting melee hits and then being struck, creating that devastating arc damage. Now we're throwing on an additional melee well maker to create even more of those arc elemental wells, as well as momentum transfer, so causing damage with our grenade reduces melee cooldown. Since we have our grenade being able to stay on longer with that storm grenade and spark of magnitude, we're able to get our melee back a little bit faster because that grenade causes a decent amount of damage with this build. Now on our chest piece right here, we're going fusion reserves for that deliverance, as well as bountiful wells, which helps us stack these melee well makers, allowing us to produce 2, 3, 4 of those arc elemental wells, depending on how many of those mods we have stacked up. Moving on to our boots here, we're going to have our next melee well maker, which will again give us more of those arc elemental wells when we get those Maured melee combatant final blows, which will in turn again blind enemies based on our fragments and aspects that we have on. We also have Orb of Restoration on this build, so picking up Orbs of Power grants a small amount of energy to our ability with the least amount of energy. So our grenade, melee, and class shield here in Titan, whichever one has the least amount of energy, will get some when we pick up an Orb of Power. And finally on this, we're going to have 2 sets of Outreach as well as Well of Ions, so reduce melee cooldown when using your class ability. So every time we throw down our Titan shield, we're going to get melee energy back. And then Well of Ions, picking up all those arc elemental wells that we're creating via melee well maker, will give our next melee attack increased damage. So it is a very big build on causing damage with our melees to get that exotic perk on our gauntlets, Fury Conductors, to proc and start stacking up. And then we get hit by a melee and it just wipes out enemies in our vicinity, as well as giving us that damage resistance inside of the gauntlets itself, as well as those fragments that we have inside of arc, which give us that reduced damage for melees and when we're surrounded. So it is a high survivability build here for our Titan, especially for that end game, going in with master content raids, stuff like that. This will help you be that support character, get those melees to blind enemies, as well as create arc elemental wells for our allies, as well as just that add clear potential with the ACD feedback fences, creating that burst of arc damage when we get hit by a melee. So it is a very, very fun build in my opinion to take in for a support class more than a DPS tank for Titan in Arc 3.0. Y'all have to let me know what you think about it. Very, very fun. Again, in my personal opinion, there is a lot of different ways that we can build out a lot of these builds, and if they work in master content, they basically can work anywhere throughout the Destiny PvE world. So thank you guys so much again for watching, and that support lately, absolutely gnarly. Truly appreciate y'all. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.